thank you that we can trust you as we open in your word and as we share from science, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I'm actually opening the Bible to the book of Ephesians, Paul's letter to the church of Ephesus. He wrote it from prison. This is one of Paul's prison's epistles. And Ephesians gives some of the most simple, clear descriptions of saving faith, of trusting in Jesus for our salvation. I'm in Ephesians chapter 2, beginning with verse 5. Let's start with verse 4. It's such a great verse, we can't skip that out. Verse 4, but God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sins, has quickened or made us alive together with Christ. By grace you are saved. And he's raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus. I'm reading in Ephesians chapter 2. That was verse 7. And then if that hasn't been clear enough, in Ephesians 2 verse 8, he says, for by grace are ye saved through faith. And that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Now you say, well, that just makes it all totally clear right there, Dr. DeRose, right? We're saved by grace through faith. But Paul didn't stop there. In verse 10, he said, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for what? Unto good works. And then as you read on through Ephesians, this is what I was reading this morning, come to chapter 4, and Paul says, I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord. So he's in prison for his faith. And he says, I beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. So he says, look, you're a Christian, live like a Christian. And then he goes on and he spells it out. And he actually gives some very plain counsel here. He doesn't say just focus on Jesus and you'll be changed. Listen to some of the things that he says. Look at verse 28 in Ephesians 4. Let him that stole steal no more. So if a robber comes to Jesus, is the most important thing that he's trusting in Jesus for his salvation. That's the most important thing. But Paul didn't say, well, just stop. Don't just think about Jesus. No, he said, you're a robber. He said, stop stealing. He's saying, now go do the works of Jesus, is what he's saying. He said, you've been saved and Jesus. Now live like Jesus really is your Lord. And so many Christians miss this. And, I talk with them about healthful living. They say, but Dr. DeRose, I'm saved by faith. It's not by my works. Well, I'm not saying it doesn't save you. Well, it could save you from lung cancer to stop smoking, but you don't get to heaven any quicker. Well, some Christian would say, oh yeah, you get to heaven quicker if you die sooner. Well, that's a whole other Bible study. But, okay, anyway. So I just want to give you that background because we're going to jump into the topic called Changing Bad Habits for Good. And if you go and pick up that DVD, it's 2 presentations. You're going to hear pretty much some of the high points of that series right here. And I do it in a way that I could give this in a secular workplace. I might throw in a little bit more Bible illustrations for you because we're here. But this general theme, it appeals to Christians and non-Christians alike, but it's really not a heavily Bible-focused talk. You'll hear some Bible references, but I want just again to let you know, there's another one of these kind of foundational talks. So sometimes when I'm approaching people, I might use this approach, Ancient Secrets, Modern Health. Give you an example. I did it a couple years ago in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where we actually recorded that particular series you have. And we had people from the community coming and responding to those talks. Some of them had never been in the church before, but they came out for those topics. Okay, with that background, you'll get some exposure now to what? Changing bad habits for good. We're not going to use the PowerPoint for this one, and we'll see if you like it better without the PowerPoint. This lends itself just fine without it. all was very, very quiet in the DeRose household. I was just a little boy at the time, perhaps 8 or 10 years of age. And when I was convinced that everyone was asleep, I quietly slipped out of my bed. I made my way across my bedroom and then into the hall, and then to the stairs. Slowly, I walked down those stairs, ever so careful, wanting to make sure those stairs didn't creak, because I was headed to only one place in the DeRose household. It was the kitchen. That's right. For in the kitchen of the DeRose household, there was a large metal canister. And so it was on that dark night, walking through the house, finally in the kitchen, and there it was, the cookie jar. I very carefully made my way over. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with a metal cookie jar before. But you have to be very careful when you take the lid off not to make any noise. And so I very carefully lifted the lid off. I reached inside. David, what are you doing in the cookie jar? You're right. Like you, I jumped. It was Mom. Mom had caught me in the cookie jar. And you know what she said to me? She said something that went like this. David, don't you know eating cookies in the middle of the night is not good for you? Now, I did not realize it at the time, but there was a connection that was developing in my brain. Tastes good, bad for me. Now, in that very same DeRose household, I had 2 parents who loved me very much. They're actually both still alive. By all indications, they still love me very much. But when I was very young, they had some goals for me. Now, it's always awkward when you get older to talk about the goals that your parents had for you when you were a kid. But some of their goals were that I would grow up to be strong and healthy. Now, some of you might say, well, they either succeeded or they didn't. But that was their goal for me. And so some days I'd be sitting there at the DeRose table, and they'd be serving these, these green leafy vegetables. Now, I'm trying to say that with some of the enthusiasm that I had when I was a child. Now, don't misunderstand me. I love green leafy vegetables now, and I hope you children love green leafy vegetables. I mean, I love my kale, and if they have kale today, I hope they have enough that I can get, more than one serving. But the point is, when I was little, I didn't like that stuff. And so they typically put it on my plate. And if I was really good, I might be moving that kale with my fork. It's probably more likely spinach, I think. And I'm moving that spinach around with my fork, and sooner or later, you know what would happen? My dad would turn to me. And he'd say something that went like this: David, eat that spinach. It's good for you. Now, I didn't realize it at the time. But there was another connection developing in my brain. What do you think that connection was? Tastes bad, good for me. You got it. Now, I tell you that story because I find that my childhood is not all that different from most people that I've worked with. We somehow think in life that there are 2 categories of things. There's a category of things that we would label healthy, but we often attach interesting adjectives. Now, maybe not here at Uchee Pines, but most people. If you say these things are healthy, what kind of other adjectives do they attach to healthy behaviors? Bad, tastes bad, boring, dull. Have you heard things like this? And what adjectives do they attach to the bad health habits? Wonderful, delicious. In fact, One of my kids, they've heard me give this talk before. It was a while ago. They found something in a magazine. And they said, Dad, here's what you talk about. And there was some picture, of some chocolate cake. And the heading was, decadently delicious. Okay? So you understand. It's part of our vocabulary. And I have patients that tell me. I was talking with a patient not long ago. I forget what we were talking about, whether it was diet or other lifestyle practices. And he said, Dr. DeRose, I've got to do something for fun. What was it? Some bad habit. Some bad habit. So we have this idea that somehow if we get too healthy, life will be dull and boring. So we have to include some things that are bad for our health. Now, is this true? Does the medical science tell us anything about this? Well, the medical science actually tells us that this is totally false. We don't have to choose between being happy and healthy. Happiness and health come from the very same lifestyle. Now, let me give you some illustrations of this. One of the great studies in public health is the Alameda County Health Study. Some of you, if you're public health professionals, if you did what I did and, spent some time and got a master's in public health degree, this is one of the early studies in public health. Some years ago, I mentioned speaking at the University of Wisconsin at their National Wellness Conference. I think now they usually have it at the University of Minnesota. But for several years, I presented there. One of the years I was presenting, one of the other presenters was Dr. Lester Breslow. And just full disclosure, I was giving one of those small breakout sessions, and, Breslow was giving one of the keynote talks. But Breslow, at that time when I met him, was in his 80s. Maybe even his early 90s. I think he was in his 80s at the time. It was a while ago. And he was still active in the public health community. Lester Breslow was the one that envisioned the Alameda County Health Study. And so I had a chance to talk with him about the study. He actually shared about it there in that public venue. So let me tell you about this study, because it's fascinating to learn its background. It was back in the 1960s or before when Breslow had this idea, early 60s or before that, and it was a crazy idea, and I'll tell you how crazy people thought it was in just a minute. It was this crazy idea. Breslow actually thought if you measured people's lifestyles, you could tell how long they would live. Now, right now you say, well, of course. I mean, we're here at UT Pines. But back in 1960, in that era, what was the focus in the 60s and early 70s? It was on medicine and modern medical technology. In fact, in the early 70s, Richard Nixon, looking at medical science, he said, I am declaring what? A war on, you remember this? On cancer. We're going to just wipe out cancer. We put a man on the moon, we can wipe out cancer. It's high tech. That's what the focus was. It was not on lifestyle. So Breslow said, no, I think life. And so what he did, he was the head of the California Department of Public Health, heading up all the public health work in the whole state of California. And so he was well known in the public health world. And so he invited the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. This was in the old days when, before all this formal grant writing and everything, they would just come out. You'd have lunch together. Now we'd say, there's terrible conflict of interest. So they stayed out with Breslow for several days. And he's telling them about this idea. We're going to recruit this population in the Bay Area, and we're going to follow these people, and we'll look at their lifestyle, and then follow them over time, and see if there's a connection between when they die and their lifestyle habits. And what do you think happened at the end of those several days? Well, in Breslow's words, as I recall them, it was something like, Breslow, you're crazy. We're not going to give you a penny. And they left. And that would have been the end of the story if it weren't for the National Cancer Institute. I don't know if someone was there from the NCI, National Cancer Institute, but a while later, I think it was a couple years later, someone from the National Cancer Institute got on the phone and called Dr. Breslow. And I said, Breslow, do you still want to do that study? And he said, yes. And they actually funded it. Wow. They recruited about 7,000 people from Alameda County. That's there in the Oakland, San Francisco, that Bay Area there in California. And they followed these people. And the first study that I know of was published in 1970 in the journal Preventive Medicine. And it's a very famous study. You've probably heard of the results, even if you haven't heard of the study. They identified, or at least widely publicized, were 7 health habits that they identified that help people live longer. Some of you have heard of the study. Others of you could guess. What do you think the 7 health habits were? Let's see if we can get them down together. Not smoking. That's 1. Regular exercise. That's 2. What else was on there? Okay. Some of you are talking, I hear a number of you talking about beverages and alcohol. Boy, and I never talked about that last time. You're reminding me. My sins are revisiting me. Now, let's talk about alcohol. In Breslow's conclusion, it was little or no alcohol. They didn't urge abstinence. We got to stop at 3 because we've mentioned this twice now, and I got to tell you about this. And I'm going to be very plain with you. The medical research indicates that if you are on a lousy lifestyle, there is some heart benefit from alcoholic beverages. Did you hear what I said? I qualified it. If you're on what kind of lifestyle? A lousy lifestyle. If you're on a good lifestyle, and this was studied in the Oxford Vegetarian Study. These were not Seventh-day Adventists. I'm sure there were some probably in there. But these were vegetarians in England that were studied. They looked at the vegetarians who were drinking a little bit of alcohol. Did it help their heart? Not a bit. They got no benefit at all. Here's the best explanation for how you put this together. The average American, average person in the Western world, is not eating enough fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's dismal. I mean, if you look at the data, it's dismal. Fruits and vegetables were made by who? What factory? Yeah, it was made by God, okay? Yeah, they're not fabricated. God created these things. And into fruits and vegetables, He infused them with literally thousands of compounds called phytochemicals. And I don't know how much time we'll have to talk about this. We talk about it some in my series Longevity Plus. But these phytochemicals help prevent cancer and heart disease. They thin the blood. They help heal cartilage. They're anti-inflammatory. So there's all these health-giving compounds loaded in plant products. They lower blood pressure. In my series, Reversing Hypertension Naturally, we talk about the natural ACE inhibitors that are in plants. These are the same kind of things that the pharmaceutical companies sell. They're in plants. So the average American is not eating enough plants. Now, let me just ask you something. You may not have thought about this, but where does every alcoholic beverage come from? Every one. Where does it come from? Comes from plants. Have you ever thought about this? So whether it's the wine made from the grapes, whether it's the rum made from the sugar cane, whether you go to Japan and they offer you sake and it's from rice, whether they make vodka from potatoes or, whiskey from corn. Are you following along with me? So when they ferment these products, does it remove all the phytochemicals from them? No. Especially the things that are lower and that aren't further distilled. I mean, like wine or beer, they have many phytochemicals in them. So they're still good things. Now, I don't know if they use it here at Uchee Pines, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But in my work in lifestyle centers, we would often prescribe a beer ingredient to help people sleep. Yeah, hops. Now, we wouldn't have them drink the beer, you understand. We wouldn't isolate the hops agent from we'd just give them the herb, the hops. Because hops has lupulin, a natural sedative compound. Okay? So here's where I'm going with this. People that don't see the big picture, or back in the 60s when they didn't see the big picture, they didn't realize all the carnage that alcohol was causing. Now the best expert groups are telling us to avoid alcohol. The World Health Organization, in no uncertain terms, tells us the less alcohol you drink, the better. Study after study shows that even small amounts of alcohol, and I may show you this, it's in some of my presentations, but I'm not sure how much we're going to cover this week, but even small amounts of alcohol, even, quote, moderate drinking, just a drink a week, increases your risk of cancer. And one of the cancers that it significantly increases the risk of, ladies, is breast cancer. So in fact, I was shocked. I'm on the road a lot, and that's not the shocking. It may be shocking to you, I don't know. But I'm on the road a lot, and sometimes when I'm traveling, I'll missing my family, they're not with me. So the best company I have is turning on those morning news programs. I haven't done the actual statistical study, but I'm convinced I'm learning more about what's shaping my patients' medical attitudes than I'm about the news, because I think they have about 3 minutes of commercial for every minute of news, and a lot of those commercials are selling, the latest drug and thing. Anyway, so I'm getting a medical education there that helps me deal with my patients. But anyway, one of the days I have the news program on, and one of these studies that just come out, another one, showing that moderate drinking increases the risk of breast cancer. And so how are they going to cover this on the news? Well, they get a cardiologist on, and a female cardiologist, right? And the female cardiologist, what does she say? She says, don't worry about this. Basically, I'm just paraphrasing. She says, many more women die from heart disease than from cancer, and alcohol is good for your heart, so just keep drinking your wine. No, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. All she had to say is just, be a vegetarian. Go to Uchee Pines and stay away from the alcohol. All that money you're spending on the alcohol, put it in a savings account. And, and after a year or two, you'll have enough to go to Uchee Pines. But she didn't say that. She lost her opportunity. But you're following along with me, right? So we've digressed a little bit. We were back with Lester Breslow in the Alameda County Health Study. We found that he talked about not smoking and regular exercise, and back then, we'll excuse him, but they said little or no alcohol instead of really being on the cutting edge today when they should have said what? No alcohol. Okay, so I got that out of my system now. Thank you for making sure I did that. Okay, so you got 4 more to come up with. They didn't identify sunshine, but they did rest. Okay, and they said in their research, 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Okay, so we're up to 4. Got to come up with 3 more. There are 7 that they were highly publicized. Yes, regular breakfast. Eating breakfast regularly. And there are 2 more. No, they didn't look at any of the nuances of diet. They didn't look at water per se. But they did look at another thing that looked at meal timing. And it was not eating between meals. Interesting, not eating between meals. And then the last one was being at or around your ideal weight. Okay? So ideal weight, that was the 7th one. Now, when they came out with that data and they analyzed it after 9 years of following those 7,000 people, they found those that followed all 7 of those health habits had only 1/2 to 1/4 the likelihood of dying over the course of those 9 years that they had followed the population than those who were following 0 to 3 of the health habits. So as I just went through that list, now you're a healthy group here. You might say, great, I'm glad I'm doing all those things. But the average person, when I go through that list and I make that connection with longevity, they say, well, what does that prove? It just proves the very opposite of what you're trying to tell us. Because you just told us you'll live longer if you do all these things I don't like to do, like exercise and eat breakfast and, lose weight. None of that's any fun. So it's just your same old, same old. I'm either going to choose to be happy or I'm going to choose to be healthy. No. The Alameda County Health Study didn't finish in 1970. As they continued to follow this population over time, they started to look at other things, including disability. By the way, what is it that affects your quality of life probably more than anything else as you age? Well, we could put it in a big umbrella. We could say disability, right? I mean, most people are quite happy to live as long as possible, as long as they were assured they'd have no disability. If I say, look, I can guarantee you no disabilities, no cognitive disabilities, no orthopedic disabilities, no heart disabilities, they'll say, oh yeah, sign me up, I'll live to 100. But most people don't want to live that long. Why? Because you don't have to be 100 to start realizing that things don't quite work as well as they did when you were 25. Right? And you say, boy, if I'm like this now, what'll it be if I'm 100? So, 7 things, one more time. I'm not going to mention them. I want you to help me. Let's see if you can, as a group, come up with those 7 things again. What are they? No smoking. Regular exercise. Not eating between meals. Ideal weight. No alcohol. Rest. And regular breakfast. Okay? There's the 7. Now, we didn't give them in the same order just to keep you confused, but you guys were giving them in that order. Now, I should tell you one other thing, and I'm going to do this again in full disclosure. I don't think I do it in the DVD, but it's in other DVDs. It's not in the Changing Bad Habits for Good. The Alameda County Health Study also identified 4 other habits that are not as often cited as those 7. They're called the Alameda 7 that I just went through with you. But there were 4 other habits. I don't know why this was, and I didn't ask Breslow it, and he's dead now, so I'll never find out from him. But there were 4 other health habits that they didn't publicize as highly, but they were actually more powerful than the ones we just mentioned. And these actually dealt with social health and social connectedness. So it were things like being married. Interestingly, in the Alameda County Health Study, they found that one gender was helped much more than the other by marriage. Now, I can say this since it looks like the majority of you are women. You'll defend me if the men revolt. You know, a lot of men like to think they did their wife a favor when they marry them. Yeah, well, the research indicates that the men do get much more benefit from marriage than women do. Okay, yes. And if my wife's listening, I know she's not, but I would tell her, thank you, Sonia. We've been married about 27 years. It's been a blessing the whole way. So, okay. So marriage is a blessing, especially for men. It's a blessing for women as well. They get benefit also. For women, there was some other domain of social health that was much more beneficial than men. What do you think it was? It was connection with friends and family. So if you're a man and you begrudge, the time your wife is spending on Skype or on the phone or connecting with her friends, you should look at that as life insurance. Okay? Life insurance. So they also looked at something else that was associated with longevity. Church membership. Well, they called it faith community membership. Okay? I think they may have even called it in the 60s, they may even have called it church membership back then. You'd have to double check. But the point was, so this is this social health element. And we tend to come back to it because it is so powerful. But for some reason, it's often left out of the equation. You see, you come to Uchee Pines, you learn the lifestyle, but you don't realize maybe that one of the most important things you can do when you go home is to connect with other people who share that vision. If they don't share the vision, what should you do? That's right. Hold seminars in your church. You say, but I can't speak, Dr. DeRose. That's why we have DVDs for you. You see? Okay. So, what does all this have to do? The 4th one, it's a club or other society membership. Okay, so club membership, community service membership, so other organizations. Yeah, thanks for making sure I completed the list. Okay, so where are we going with these habits? They've looked at these same habits now in the Alameda County Health Study, and they found that they were correlated with lower rates of disability. You see? So if you want to avoid disability, you want to follow the same health habits that help you live longer. So in other words, from this study, as well as studies that have looked at quality of life, if you want to improve your quality of life, it's not doing the bad habits that you grew up with. But I love smoking so much, Dr. DeRose, patient tells me.
Quit any time.
Yeah, and I've done it 100 times, right? Yeah. But here's the thing. Most important message I give in changing bad habits for good. Here it is. And I'll tell it to you this way because we're a Christian audience here. I'll express it another way just so you know how I'll say it if I thought there were a bunch of atheists in the room. God has created us with the ability to choose what we enjoy. Okay, let me tell you a different way. I would just say we have the capacity. It's not as powerful to say it that way, but because God created us with this capacity, but we have the capacity to choose what we will enjoy. Do you realize how powerful that concept is? You see, because what it's telling us, let's talk about that smoker again. Now, some of you in this room might be smoking right now. We're not going to ask you to raise your hands. But is anyone willing to tell us that they're a former smoker, that they quit? Anyone willing to tell us that? Okay. One brave soul up here. Others of you keeping it a secret. Can I ask you what your first cigarette ever was like? Was it did you feel like it was the most wonderful experience? Okay, so this is a common experience. Someone's first cigarette was terrible. It wasn't good at all, but they just did it because all their friends were doing it, right? But what did they do after that first cigarette? They had another one, and they stuck with it until, you know what happened? They actually developed an enjoyment for something that they once hated. Now, this is very interesting, isn't it? Now, very rarely, I've helped a lot of people stop smoking by God's grace over the years, and I think I've met one or two people who said their first cigarette was wonderful, and almost all those people, I think all of them, have grown up in a home where there was smoking. So they had already probably become addicted to it on some level because of all that their parents were smoking. But most people, it's revolting. Some people have told me they vomited the first time they smoked. They got sick to their stomach. They got dizzy. They started coughing. Why would anyone stick with it? Well, social support. Peer pressure. We call it peer pressure, but I call it social support. It's just not the good kind of social support. So you say, well, think about that for a minute. If someone can develop an enjoyment for something they once hated that was bad for them, do you think it might be possible to develop an enjoyment for something that was good that you don't like right now? This was firmly entrenched in my mind as a relatively young physician. I had just completed a residency in internal medicine, and unlike most of my peers who went off to lucrative careers, became rich and famous. Well, I don't know if they became rich or famous, but they definitely chose positions with a higher pay scale than I did because I went to Wildwood to practice, sister institution here of Uchee Pines. And so while I was there at Wildwood, on a fairly meager salary, I guess I realized maybe that with my medical debts or something, maybe this wasn't, although people were helping me while I was there at Wildwood to pay those debts. For whatever reason, I was invited to go back to Kettering Medical Center where I had done my residency and help them do some preventive medicine. So I went up there for a week, and we went to an industrial site in the Indianapolis area, and we were doing screening. We were doing health screening of these employees at this business, and then I was counseling with them, doing lifestyle counseling. And I met two people who told me the very same tragic story. Same tragic story. Let me tell you how it happened. The year before, Kettering did not have this contract. They had another company that was doing health screening, and one of the things they were screening for was cholesterol. And two people had the very same story. Maybe if I had met two people with identical story, they were not related, they told me the very same thing. I think I saw one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and here's how the story went. Last year they had their cholesterol checked, and guess what their cholesterol was? too high. Too high. And so the doctor at that time told them, not medication, stop eating red meat and start eating fish and chicken. That's what he told them. Both these people had the same reaction. We don't like fish. We don't like chicken. But the doctor said, and they both did what the doctor said. And when I saw them back a year later, what do you think they were eating? Fish and chicken. Now they developed a taste for fish and chicken. And we checked their cholesterols. They were both too high. So why was it a tragic story? It was a tragic story because they were willing to change their lifestyle to something they didn't like, and the doctor didn't tell them the best lifestyle to lower their cholesterol. What is the best diet to lower your cholesterol? That's right, it is a total vegetarian diet. Call it a vegan diet if you want. If you don't like the word vegan, you can call it that strange term of a totally plant-based diet, which has never made any sense to me, because it's either plant-based, and plant-based doesn't mean it just means it's based on plants. Anyway, that's my own personal opinion, okay? Totally plant-based. Well, there's a totally cement-based structure. Well, what does that mean? Well, it sounds like the foundation's cement, not that the whole thing. I don't know. Anyway, so you can decide whatever you want to call it. Total vegetarian, vegan, totally plant-based. That's the best diet to lower your cholesterol. But they weren't told that. So that's what I told them. But now what were they going to have to do? They were going to have to make a break with the chicken and the fish. But here's the point why I tell you this. It's just an illustration of how God has created us. Whether we look at cigarettes or whether we look at a good habit, we can choose a new lifestyle and we can develop an enjoyment for it. How many of you have experienced this? I have. Some of you know that Uchee Pines is a Seventh-day Adventist institution. I never heard of Seventh-day Adventists growing up. I had never met a vegetarian growing up. I frequented the fast food restaurants. I'm just being honest with you. So some of you might say, well, yeah, DeRose, you give all these lectures. It's easy for you because you just were raised a vegetarian. I was not raised a vegetarian. In fact, I was actually quite famous for my eating habits. I mean, it wasn't like I got any particular accolades, but they were actually watching me in my community. Because there was a restaurant there in the community and that I would go to frequently, and they kept changing the sign the more I went into it. First it said something like dozens served, and then it said hundreds, and then it got up to millions or whatever. Are you following along with this? I don't know if they still have this on their signs, but the restaurant was called McDonald's. Okay? So that's the kind of stuff I was eating. And so when I started, God got my attention. That's what happened. And started to show me that he wanted me to take care of my health, take care of my body. Now, again, when I do it for a secular audience, I don't give them some of these, I give them some of the colorful insights, but I don't tell them all the spiritual part of it to scare them off right at the beginning. There's ways you can scare people off, and the Lord gives you wisdom as you deal with people to know what to share when. But the Lord got my attention, and he said, I got to get rid of some of these foods. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background. 3 of my grandparents were born in a foreign country. The original family name was DeRose. Any of you like to guess where they were born? Italy. That's right. They were born in Italy. And I actually look more like the grandmother who was of Irish and English extraction. But my other siblings look more Italian than I do. Now, some of my friends in Italy have said, no, there's Northern Italians. You look like us, too. But anyway, they were darker, and they actually had some interesting habits. There was always wine in the house, and there was always cheese in the house. And most every meal had cheese. Now, by the way, if you haven't put all this together yet, one of the worst foods there is for blood pressure, for heart disease, for diabetes because of its saturated fat, is cheese. And I'm eating it all the time. Okay? All the time. I grew up in Illinois. Now, some of you know your geography of the U.S. My daughter, she's in college. She's studying to be a teacher. So one of the things she's taking is geography classes. I didn't study that in college, but she did. She's studying it right now. And she's learning by how her peers perform on the tests that it is true what's been told about Americans, that we have no clue when it comes to geography, even of our own country. Okay? So I'm not going to ask you as a group to tell me what state is just north of Illinois, but some of you actually know. That's right. It's Wisconsin. And do any of you know what Wisconsin is called? Yeah, it's called the dairy state. Some of you call it the cheese, state. So I grew up, this is true. I grew up in northern Illinois thinking that cheese and ice cream were health foods. Really? No, it's true. Okay, because they tell us, that dairy products were healthy. And I think they even told us, ice cream is a health food. And I just thought that was great. And in fact, I would eat ice cream commonly before I went to bed at night. And if I didn't have ice cream, I'd have cake or cookies. You're starting to get the picture. You're saying, boy, it's amazing you're still alive, Dr. DeRose. It's amazing. But I did have some good health habits, too. I got to give you full disclosure. And to this day, I vividly remember always eating breakfast. How many of you are impressed? Now, before you're impressed, you should ask me what my breakfast was. I will tell you, I can remember getting off the school bus. I went to a high school some miles from where I lived. I'd get off the bus, and I'd go immediately to the vending machines. And I'd get a candy bar and a Coke. Yeah, really. Okay? So now some of you are saying, boy, you must be miserable, Dr. DeRose, here at Uchee Pines. No cheese, no meat, no wine, no candy bars, no Cokes. I mean, how have I survived even as long as I've been here? Well, long ago, the Lord told me to get those things out of my lifestyle. Now, let me tell you something interesting. At first, do you think it was easy? Do you think I threw a party when I thought the Lord wanted me to change my lifestyle? No, this was actually bad news. It was such bad news when I started learning some of this stuff. I had actually recently become a Christian and a Seventh-day Adventist, and I had a roommate in college who had also was a recent Seventh-day Adventist. And I was reading some of this because Seventh-day Adventists have written about this for a long time, about healthy lifestyle habits. So even back in my day, this stuff was out there. It wasn't just cutting-edge stuff from 2016. And when I'd learned some of this stuff, I'd say, hey, if I'm not going to eat cheese, Tom can't eat it either. You see this, Tom? Right here. Cheese, wholly unfit for food. You see that? So if I'm giving up the pizza, you're giving it up too. So I didn't have necessarily the right motivation, but we became vegetarians together. And I noticed something. As I changed my lifestyle, you know what? Those new foods started to taste pretty good. And after a while, because I'd made a clean break, listen carefully, I'd made a what? Clean break with those bad habits, I started to develop what? New enjoyments. Do you see what's happening? One of the reasons why people never develop new enjoyments is they keep rewarding themselves with the old bad habits. It's crazy. It really is. Psychologically, it's crazy. So you say, but Dr. DeRose, it's not a real bad problem I have with chocolate. I mean, most of the time, I limit myself to 1 pound a day. It used to be 3 pounds. Well, I'm saying the best thing, this is, by the way, if you're eating 1 pound of chocolate every day, I can just about guarantee you it's a problem for you. Now, listen, I don't make this into a legalistic seminar and have people come to my lectures and sign a pledge that they'll never touch chocolate and they'll never have a drop of caffeine. I mean, I think it's best to avoid all those things, and I let the Holy Spirit convict people how He will. But here's my point. If you can't control your consumption of something, some of us in the medical community would say that qualifies as an addiction. Okay? And how do you get free of an addiction? That's right. You do it cold turkey. You make a clean break with it. And that frees you to develop new enjoyments. If you say, but Dr. DeRose, can't I just have a piece of chocolate once a week? I'm a pound a day. Wouldn't that be good to cut back to one chocolate kiss a week? What do you think? Would that be progress? Well, it would definitely decrease the caloric intake. It probably might help them with their diabetes. It may even help with other problems too. Don't believe all this stuff about chocolate being a health food. I'll just give you the sound bite on that one. Listen, I've been a physician for over 30 years. I have yet to see a patient in my office who was there because of a lack of chocolate consumption. Okay? I just want you to know. Just set the record clear. Okay? So if you cut down to just one kiss a week, what's going to happen?
It'll be 2 next week.
It could be, but what you will end up doing is if you're able to maintain that for any length of time, you will only be torturing yourself. Because you see, what you're doing is you're telling yourself that chocolate is so good, it's so desirable, but poor me, because of my diabetes and my weight, I can only have it once a week. And so what do you begin to think about? You live a life of deprivation instead of a life of freedom. You know, I find it so interesting, and I'll often use this illustration even with secular audiences, from the 10 Commandments. Why do we call them commandments? I mean, wouldn't it have been better? Wouldn't you like it better if God just gave 10 suggestions? I had a patient in my office not all that long ago. I was talking with her about her lifestyle and was asking some very probing questions. And she said it very kind of easy. She was kind of smiling about it. She said, well, I guess you'd kind of say I'm promiscuous. Well, she was talking about how many sexual partners she was having, okay? And she was dealing with some serious issues. So for this young lady, would you think she might have liked it better if it said, thou shalt cut down on adultery? Do you think that would be... Well, I mean, wouldn't it be good for her? I mean, it's sexually transmitted... Wouldn't it decrease her risk of sexually transmitted disease? Let's say she's having 50 partners a year and she cut down to 2. Wouldn't that be positive as far as the health benefits? Well, I think it would be positive. So why did God say, thou shalt not commit adultery? I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but let me give you one from the health realm. There's actually no power in cutting back. So God just makes it plain. He's showing us the best way to live. He's showing us the happiest way to live, the most loving way to live. And he says, don't commit adultery. Make a clean break with it. But I'm having 50 partners a year, Dr. DeRose. Couldn't I just, cut down to 1 a month? Why is that not powerful? It's because she's still dwelling on what? Who's my next relationship going to be with? Instead of what God wanted, for her just to have one person in her life. One man, by the way, if anyone was wondering. With me coming from California, you understand. Okay? That's God's ideal. For those of you, and I actually do work with people in the LGBT community, and, God loves them too. And, and we have to work with them where they're at. So, the point is, though, God has given us principles for our benefit, okay? And just like the first time I see them, I don't say, divorce yourself from your... I have women who have wives as patients, and we don't tell them they have to have a divorce the first visit. But the point is, we're trying to help them where they're at and ultimately show them something better. If that discredits me in some of your eyes, you don't have to come to any of my other lectures. But the point is, God is trying to show us the best lifestyle. If we understand, it's not only the best, it's the healthiest, and it is the happiest lifestyle. It's a life that allows us to have the best communion with heaven. It's the best lifestyle for our devotional life. It's the best lifestyle for us to be active in ministry. And what does it involve? It involves cutting off those things that are hurting ourselves. God in love shows us what those are. But if we don't make that clean break, we don't free ourselves to develop new enjoyments.